This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to this week's episode of Killer Innovations, a show about creativity, innovation, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. One of the common questions we get on the show is really around this whole issues around change and change management. A lot of organizations think they want to get into the innovation game or they're committed to the innovation game, but they really struggle on how do you change the organization and how do they really bring along everybody in that organization as part of this transformation. I've lived through it a couple times. I've both at my time as CTO at Hewlett Packard and even now in my current day job as the CEO at Cable Labs. It's a challenge. It's a challenge all organizations face. Today's guest we're bringing on is someone who actually goes out there and runs these workshops and actually helps organizations get through this whole change process. And how do you bring those people along? So today's guest I'd like to bring on here is Mo. Now, Mo, your background is pretty wild. It comes from a wide range of perspectives. You kind of have a little bit of a different background from a typical innovation guy, which is what I found interesting when I was doing a little bit of background. So, Mo, why don't you just spend maybe 5 minutes, introduce yourselves to the audience here?
Sure. And you raise a good point, Phil. It isn't the usual background that I bring it from, although it is from an experienced background as well. My background is actually in the logistics and supply chain arena. And a lot of people think, well, that's kind of boring. Okay, that's just a matter of getting things from here to there, maybe storage, how things actually get there. But, you know, the funny thing is, if you break down the word logistics is just a way to go ahead and do something. And the funny thing about logistics and supply chain is it's incredibly volatile. It changes quite a bit, sometimes even day to day between the government regulations and certainly now with new technology. I've been fortunate, or should we say unfortunate, to be both part of good and bad change within organizations. Some of them I've led, some of them I've just been an observer from. So I'd like to think a unique background, a unique perspective really of going ahead and looking at these things. I started actually talking about change maybe about 15 years ago at industry trade shows. And then I've just broadened the horizon from that as more and more people seem to be interested in that. The funny thing is people talk about innovation and they think creative types or engineering, which is why, you know, hey, if someone's talking about innovation from a logistics and supply chain background, that seems kind of strange. Well, but in reality, if you think about what innovation is just a fancy word for change. So if we're able to master change, then innovation just comes as a natural result.
Now, well, this brings up a good point, because the question I tend to get from a lot of people, a lot of organizations is the difficulty of change. And so you've been working with a number of your clients on how do you help them, and you've had your own experience, right? I guess we've all had that experience of being in organizations that have done it well and not done it so well. Why is change so hard for most organizations to achieve?
Well, and the simple answer is the reason why change is so hard, even from a personal standpoint. And from a personal standpoint, it's a matter of fear of the unknown. We'll go ahead and take the devil we know, even if it's a bad devil, rather than an uncertain future, even if it's a good future. We just don't know. And this unknown is really scary. Organizations tend to fall into a certain inertia, if you will. The way we've done it, it's been successful, kind of successful, sort of successful. Why rock the boat then? And that's something that you hear all the time. You know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, the problem is that's not viable for the future, because the fact of the matter is that the world is changing. The world keeps moving. There's no such thing as the status quo. Standing still is the same thing as moving backwards.
Well, I think also one of the challenges for change, as you pointed out, is kind of this fear, this unknown. So how do you get organizations then to kind of make that first step? What's kind of that key thing to get them to actually see that, hey, I'm here, it's not so great, I got to get there, could be much better, how do I get there?
Well, I think the key really is, and this is really the key to any initiative, whether it's change or otherwise, is communications. And I think this is really where a lot of companies tend to fall into that, we'll call it the need to know syndrome. information is siloed in certain categories and certain divisions at a certain levels, if you will, and it's not disseminated further downstream. And what ends up happening is without that transparent and constant communication about everything that's going on, good, bad, ugly, indifferent, it doesn't make a difference. Keep communicating. There's no such thing as over communication. But without that, what ends up happening is let's just say an initiative comes down, and obviously there's going to be some sort of change involved with that. But not everything is being told. Goals aren't being told. How we're going to get there. Even potential pitfalls aren't being communicated. So further downstream, you're only hearing part of it. And people start to wonder, wait a second, how does that affect me? How does that affect my job? Am I still going to be relevant? Am I still going to be here? Should I get my resumes out? All this kind of thing is because it's an unknown. So through constant and relevant and timely and honest communication, key to virtually any initiative, but especially change, what you're doing is you're lessening that unknown. You're reducing it. And the more you reduce it, the less fear there's going to be. The less fear there's going to be, the more engagement, and the greater the likelihood of success.
Well, I think that communication point is absolutely, critical, at least from my experience and what I've seen over the years, because it is that fear of that unknown. What is it? What's happening to me? Is this going to affect my career, et cetera? And it's always amazing, though, when you're trying to lead an organization through a change initiative, how people will kind of throw out the history they've had with the organization, the trust that's been built up, and it's really about this fear, this one item. They forget about all the success they've had. And what I refer to as assume positive intent. Senior leaders screw up, they don't communicate as clearly as they should or could around some change, and we automatically jump to the negative because it's going to lose my job. Is this thing going to be successful, et cetera? And it is that communications failure. And I can joke about it now as a CEO leading an organization through change. That I probably haven't done it right completely all the time either, right? As far as communicating and really playing that leadership role. In your case, are there maybe like one or two characteristics to organizations that have done it successfully, other than the communications piece, but are there kind of core attributes of organizations that just seem to get it right? That I'm looking for something that, gives a little crisper from the standpoint of what are those characteristics that really become foundational for successful change.
Well, and again, if we leave aside communications like you just asked, I think one key really is a culture of trust. And this is something that, it sounds like, okay, well, why shouldn't we trust? But the trust has to work both ways. Senior leadership needs to be able to trust everybody downstream. Everybody downstream needs to trust senior leadership. Sort of like, I've got your back. And that's really kind of tough, especially in today's workplace where it almost seems like loyalty is a thing of the past. It's the woe be gone. Organizations feel that they need to go ahead and be able to turn the battleship around on a dime. And if that means people are suddenly losing their jobs without whatever it is or being reassigned or whatnot, then they figure they need that agility and flexibility. And I'm not saying agility and flexibility isn't important. As a matter of fact, I think that's one of the key attributes, the biggest success factor for leadership in general. But you can't ignore trust. If you don't have trust, you don't have engagement. If you don't have engagement, you don't have a relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, right? Trust is, but it is amazing though that in organizations that I've got involved in and coaching and mentoring, other CEOs that have gotten themselves in trouble is they may have a long history of trust, but boy, you can lose that trust incredibly fast through a couple of early missteps in the change process. Have you seen that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we see that. All you have to do is read the news reports of another CEO that puts their foot in their mouth or something like that. But even when they go ahead and do that, the CEOs that get it, it's okay to make a mistake, even a big one. I mean, obviously, no one likes to make a big, what we call a slow, stupid failure. You'd much rather have an intelligent, fast failure, and we can get into that later. But the idea is what do you do? Okay, you made a mistake. Now, are you going to do the politician's apology? I'm sorry that you were offended, which is really not only a non-apology, but it's insulting to anyone that's paying attention. Or are you going to go ahead and say, yes, I'm sorry, I messed up, we messed up. Here's what we're going to do to change it. Can we have your trust back? And we're going to work as hard as possible to get that back. And we like to give people second chances, especially here in America. Our society loves to give second chances.
And I think you bring up a good point. In fact, some of the people on my team, when they watch this show, are probably going to be dropping me emails about my need for that apology. So with that, we're going to dash off to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Mo. We're going to talk about this issue around failure. I'm really interested in getting your collective view on failure. So stay right there. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial break.
BizTalkRadio.com.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to this week's episode of Killer Innovations, a show about creativity, innovation, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We're coming back into the second segment. We're continuing our conversation with Mo Glenner, an author and a consultant, runs workshops around innovation, change management, and leadership within organizations. Mo's got a couple books out. We're going to talk about that later in the show. But right now, Mo, I want to talk specifically about failure and this role of failure. We were talking in the last segment about change and change management. We got into a little discussion about CEOs who either do kind of those slow failures or fast failures. So first of all, give me your perspective. I have my perspective on failure, and the listening audience of this show have heard me rant on failure in the past. But I'd like for them to hear your perspective.
Well, the interesting thing is that people get, and organizations especially, say failure is not an option. You hear that all the time. And the problem is failure is an option. As long as we're human, failure is not only an option, but failure is going to happen at some point to some degree. So the question is what do we do about that failure? And the question is what kind of failure is it? And there are two kinds really that break down. One is what I would call slow, stupid failure. That's bet the farm. That's, we've gotten all this planning and we've done all this. We haven't really done a whole lot of testing. We really think this is going to go ahead and work. And it comes out and wow, is it a colossal failure? And now a lot of people are eating crow very publicly, and it's very hard to walk it back. And the biggest thing about the slow, stupid failure is not only the wasting of time and resources and energy, but even more importantly is the goodwill. Once you lose that goodwill, it is very difficult. It's like trust. It's very difficult to get it back to where it was before. Versus the smarter way to failure, which is what we call intelligent fast failure, or IFF, which is very limited experiments that don't consume a whole lot of resources. And at that point, if there's failure, then it's part of the process almost. You learn from that so that the next time it's even stronger, it's even better. Or you realize, oh, we better go right back to the beginning where we've got a fatal flaw here. We can't go any further.
So here's the question, because I've seen organizations, they talk about the fact that they want that fast failure and they give permission to fail. But particularly when an organization has been kind of, failure's not an option, and they try to transform themselves and give people this permission to failure. Have you come across any kind of unique, whether it be incentives or approaches that kind of help employees really get the feeling that it's okay to try and fail? I've seen a few, but I was interested if you've come across any that are maybe unique approaches to how organizations actually incentivize people to actually try things out, and that failure is okay.
I think a lot of that comes down to culture. You're almost asking, for instance, in your example, you're almost asking an organization to completely change its culture. If you've got this top-down mentality where failure is, if you fail, you're flawed, sometimes publicly, sometimes there is no second chance, you're out. You can see it, don't let the door hit you on the way out. a lot of organizations still have that. So some of these organizations, ironically, are the ones that are saying, oh, we need to have a culture of innovation. Well, you really can't have that. Innovation really comes about as a set of limited failures, really. That's really where it all comes down to. If you think about it, even in a highly regimented efficiency type organization, one that parrots Lean Six Sigma. I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt, and it's theory of experimentation. That's it, theory of experimentation. You got to experiment. So the question is how are you going to experiment? I've been part of some organizations that have really tried to change that culture, and it doesn't happen overnight. Some of them go ahead and create separate divisions to start off with, and then other people see that and are able to take it on, provided that senior leadership actually lives it.
Yeah, I think and it is one of the things, right? Even in the early days of Apple, when Steve had to go off and put the Mac division in a completely separate building and separate key codes, and the pirate flag is flying, etc. In my experience, even at HP, which is a large organization, and they had this culture of this, you don't have these public failures, right? You may try something, but you keep it really small. And in fact, at HP, I put together a process which the HR department just absolutely went bananas on, which was I actually rewarded failure. If your project blew up, you got a big bonus. And the HR department was just like totally freaked out because, you're rewarding for bad behavior. I'm like, no, I'm rewarding for the right behavior. Our history is bad behavior. And I had to go to that extreme because otherwise I couldn't get anybody to even try. Using those incentives in order to try to get people to actually try and try to do something different. So in this case, the failure is you and I are on the same page as far as failure is absolutely required for any form of an innovation culture within the organization. Are there other things that you think that need to be kind of fundamental in the innovation culture for organizations? Other than, failure, obviously, but you don't want to focus on your number one objective is to fail. But are there other attributes in an innovation culture that you advise companies to think about?
Well, I think those organizations are in that culture that are espouse it more than just say we need to be innovative or we have a culture of innovation. I've seen countless organizations put that in their mission statement. I don't know what that means. It's just out there. It's almost like I'm driving down the road and I see innovative dry cleaners. Anytime I see a sign like that, I stop. I want to know what's so innovative about it. And if they can tell me that they've got some new process or something like that, great. Most of the time they're saying, oh, it just sounds cool. Okay, great. That's the reason why a lot of people think the word innovation is just a buzzword. It's a catchword and doesn't mean anything. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. I think the cultures of innovation, true innovation, sustainable innovation, and I mean sustainable in its classic definition of the word, not necessarily green, just being able to maintain it over the course of time, are ones that have a steady and constant idea pipeline. Not only are they getting ideas and the idea pipeline is always full, but they know how to judge those ideas without necessarily discouraging future ideas.
So this is an interesting question then, because the idea pipeline is one that I see organizations really struggle with. You kind of get that big bubble of ideas as soon as you put a system in place to capture those ideas. But creating a sustainable pipeline for ideas is where I've seen organizations just really, really struggle. Because it's one of those things where you got kind of this pent up demand, and now you're going to have to fill those up. So maybe when we come back, we're going to take another quick commercial break here. But when we come back, I think I'd like to pick up and talk more specifically around the whole concept of the idea pipeline, because that's one area where I've seen organizations really struggle from a sustainability perspective. So we're going to take this commercial break. When we come back, we're going to pick up on this part of the conversation. During the break, text me the word innovate to 33444 or visit killerinnovations.com/innovate. Get connected with us. With that, we'll be right back. After this short commercial break, you're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
biztalkradio.com.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to this week's episode of Killer Innovations, a show about innovation, creativity, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We're picking up in this third segment of our show today, talking about innovation, change, failure, and picking up our conversation with Mo, talking about the idea pipeline. We were just wrapping up in the last segment talking about the challenges of organizations to actually build up and sustain the idea pipeline, and that really kind of being crucial. If you're really innovative, do you have that idea pipeline? So Mo, share with us your thoughts and some of your experiences around the organizations that you've worked with around idea pipelines.
You know, I think the biggest thing is how we're getting those ideas, and then even more importantly, what are we doing with those ideas once we have them? Yeah. And this is a dynamic that you see a lot of times in any sort of brainstorming session, but you can even see it in meetings that aren't necessarily tabbed as brainstorming sessions. And if you're just a quiet observer, and I've been an observer at all levels of these type of meetings, and what ends up happening is someone offers up an idea. It's almost immediately judged, and more frequently than not shot down. And what ends up happening here is at that point is not only does the person who offered the idea not say another word the rest of the time, but nobody else seems to say a word. After all, nobody else wants to get shot down in flames. No one else wants to take that chance. Even worse, it even stifles internally, because what's happened is you accentuated your own, what we call stupid barrier. We each have this stupid barrier. We have millions of disparate ideas bouncing around our head at all times. And we have this stupid barrier that's there to protect us. We don't want to actually have to say something that's going to be judged as stupid. We don't want to look stupid. So the only things that get past that barrier are those tried and true, or maybe slight tweaks that are safe and sound. The problem is, among the barbarians thwarted at that moat are all those great ideas. And even if they're not great ideas right now, they could be later on. So the successful organizations find a way to get those ideas without judging them, at least initially. You have to judge them at some point, but at least initially, we're just getting ideas at this point. It is so difficult to do. I can even tell you in private conversation, someone will talk to me and I'm already judging the idea. And I'm the one that's trying to help organizations not do what I do myself. It really takes a concerted effort to listen to the whole idea, actually be able to consider the whole idea, and then at some point later on actually give it the consideration that it's due.
Yeah, it's what I call the 10-second rule. Within the first 10 seconds of the idea pitch, you've already scored it. Is this a 0 or is this a 5? And do I pay attention, or do I try to get this person to move on to the next idea? And you're right, though. We all do it, even those of us who've been in the innovation game for a long time, trying to get out of this judging role. So in this case, the whole idea pipeline, your fundamental premise then is an organization that truly is living the innovation culture is one that has created this mechanism to build and sustain and select, having a process to select the ideas in the innovation pipeline. So let's move on to maybe talk a little bit more about innovation. I want to spend a few minutes talking about also your book, Plus Change. So talk a little bit about your kind of philosophy on what you do on the innovation, and lead us in. Give us a little bit of background on your book.
Okay, absolutely. The innovation is really the end result. It's a formula, if you will, and I kind of coined that formulation: ideation plus change equals innovation, and equals that sustained innovation. I've been part of, consulted with, been an observer to a lot of different organizations, but some of these organizations have had innovations despite their culture, not because of the culture. So we're not saying that if you don't have a constant flow, an idea pipeline, if you haven't mastered the elements of change, that you're not going to be able to innovate. You'll probably be able to innovate, but it'll be more of a flash in the pan rather than that steady, successful, sustainable innovation that's key to the viability of an organization. I personally think that the real currency of an organization, of a successful organization, is that ability to sustain innovation. A lot of people, they go ahead and look at it and they say, well, we measure our success in dollars and yen and euro. That's not the real currency. And to even prove that, most publicly traded organizations, that first page of that public report where they have that the auditor that's going in and saying it, what are they talking about? They're talking about, is this organization viable for the next 3 to 5 years or whatever gap actually says they need to actually have? When we're talking about viable, this is part of that viability. Can we continue and even go beyond continue to be viable, to be relevant?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, right? It's also, if you look at the what I call the innovation premium that certain companies get, like Apple and Google, et cetera, their share price is built on the fact that the shareholders believe that they're going to continue to be able to crank out at the rate of innovation that they've been able, coming out with those new products and new services. And companies who look at those and say, how can you justify, 100x or 1,000x book value on the share price? It's that innovation value that gets baked into it. So tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, Plus Change, Genesis of Innovation, is not quite the sequel to my first book. My first book was purely on change management and some of the barriers and how to overcome that. That was selfish altruism. The premise of Plus Change is really to take a more holistic viewpoint of innovation, how we get there, how we can continue it. And obviously, we start with ideation. We start with not only being able to generate consistently ideas, but then how do we best judge these ideas? Because it's one thing to have that pipeline, but the quickest way to crimp down on that pipeline is judging them, let's just say, not the right way. If we don't judge them correctly, if we've introduced bias, boy, that'll put a hurting on that pipeline really fast and faster than you can say almost anything else. And all of that work that you've just put into getting that idea pipeline, all puns intended, to go down the drain. Then after you have your ideas, how do you actually put them through, which really is your change management process, or something that I call changistics, the logistics of better change. Finally, after we've got that change process in place, and we've got our ideas, now we should be able to sustain innovation. And what does that innovation look like? What I'm really trying to get people to do is to think and act even just a little bit differently. And if they can think and act just a little bit differently, they'll be, at least at some level, more successful.
So in this case, what are the organizations that you tend to work with? Are you working with the high-tech guys? Are you working with, because your background also, like I said, is a little bit unique. So your experience is also a little bit unique. Are those the kind of people that you reach out to and that you're working with today on these change activities?
Strangely enough, I've turned down work, and I can always use more work. Who couldn't use more work, especially in the consulting industry? But I've turned down some work because I tend to be a little bit of an idealist. When it comes to companies saying, well, I want to be more innovative. Do they really want to be more innovative, or do they want to just make the appearance of being more innovative? If I get the feel that this is just all for show, then we're really wasting each other's time. And certainly I could take the money and run. All apologies to the Eagles. But at the same point in time, I really do want companies to be able to think and act, even if it's just a little bit differently. So the companies I tend to work with are some old line companies. I work with a lot of commodities-based companies. As a corporate pilot, I work with aviation and aerospace companies. I also tend to work a little bit in the financial industry. And in the financial industry, I keep having people tell me, oh, we really need this. We really need this.
So before we cut out here, I want to thank you for taking the time joining us today to share with us. So if people want to follow you, where can they find you?
Okay, first on my website, www.moeglenner.com. I'm also on Twitter, at Mo Glenner, and LinkedIn as well. Also Speaker Mo Glenner on Facebook. Great.
What we'll do is we'll put all those links into the show notes. So go over and visit killerinnovations.com, look up today's show, and we'll have all those links in place. And so, hey, Mo, I just want to thank you for taking the time again to join us, and best of luck as you go out there and try to be that change agent, helping other organizations be successful in their innovation efforts.
Thank you, Phil.
And with that, we're going to stay right there. We're going to be right back after another quick, short commercial break, and I'll share with you some of my thoughts on the activities going on here at Killer Innovations, but also some thoughts on things that are coming up that I've seen questions coming in from you, the listeners of the show. You can always send your questions to phil@killerinnovations.com. We'll try to answer those in the show, or actually I'll reply back to you directly. So don't hold back. Send your questions in. And with that, we're going to take this quick commercial break. If you want to get connected to Killer Innovations, text the word innovate to 33444 or visit killerinnovations.com/innovate. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network, and we'll be right back.
BizTalkRadio.com.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to this week's episode of Killer Innovations, show about creativity, innovation, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. In this last segment, we're going to try a little bit of an experiment. I get regular questions from you, the listeners, that you email into me, and I tend to, just reply back and post. A number of you have been reaching out on Facebook, which is great. I'll try to respond to those also. But some of those questions, I actually thought I would pick some of those and share them in the last segment here of the show. So that's what we're going to do this week. But before we get into that, I wanted to share a little bit more about some of the thoughts and activities going on here at Killer Innovations. As you know, we've been syndicated on BizTalk Radio now since last July. If you happen to watch us live on Facebook, or you connect and watch us on Zoom, and you can always go to killerinnovations.com/live, and you can watch each Sunday. You can submit your questions live at that point. The video stream is something we're trying new as part of an experiment to see if you, the listeners, find that useful. From the standpoint of being able to actually participate in the show rather than just listening to it passively. Think of it as office hours, your opportunity to join in and ask questions of both me and or the guests that we have on the show. So again, I encourage you to connect in and participate live on Sundays. We're live 5 p.m. East, 2 p.m. West on the show. And I should say 90% of the time we're live. There's a few times when we will play a recorded show because of travel or some other challenges that I have with my schedule. But today we're probably 95% of the time we are live on Sunday. And so I would encourage you to participate and ask your questions at that point. And so with that, I'm going to answer some questions here for this last segment. These are questions that I've gotten from listeners over the last month or so as we've been queuing them up. If you've got a question, just drop it in email to phil@killerinnovations.com. So the first question that I want to talk about is really around ideas and idea ranking. You've heard me talk about this. If you haven't, there's some podcasts. You can just go on to Killer Innovation, search for the word ranking. Ranking for me is a critical step in the process. You've gone through your brainstorming session. You now have this list of 200 ideas. What the heck do you do with 200 ideas? Typically someone volunteers and goes, ooh, let me type them up. I'll send them around in an email. And what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens with those ideas because nobody knows what to do with a list of 200 ideas. So for me, the critical step of any next generation brainstorming session is to go through and do that, to do the ranking. Identify not just the 200 ideas, but what are those top 2-3 ideas out of that entire list. So how do you do that? The process that I use, and I've trained literally tens of thousands of people to use. It's really simple. It's the series of asking 5 questions. The 5 questions are, number 1, will this idea fundamentally change the customer's experience or expectation? Is this going to change how the customer perceives what it is they're doing? Is it going to change and really raise the bar on their overall experience? Second, will this change your competitive positioning? Will this change where the marketplace perceives you as an organization? And 3, will this idea change the economics of the industry? For something to be really a great idea, it has to be able to answer yes to one of those 3 questions. If it doesn't answer yes to one of those 3, then the question is why are we doing it? What is it? Anything we would do that would be something similar would just simply be a Me Too product. And that's not what we're here for. We're here about creating real change, real innovations that are going to improve people's lives, improve the success of a business, drive a margin premium. So you have to be able to answer yes to one of those first 3 questions. Then you have to be able to answer yes to both of the next 2 questions. Do you have a contribution to make? Is this an area where you have some expertise, a unique perspective? You've done research in it. You really understand it. It's not just an area of convenience where you have nothing to bring to the conversation. And I've seen a lot of people try to do innovations in areas where they don't really have a contribution to make because they don't know that space that well. Doesn't mean to say that you got to be an expert, but you do have to have something that you're bringing, something different, even if it's just a different approach to solving a problem. Then the 5th question is, can you generate sufficient margin? Will this idea generate a sufficient margin, back to the business or back to the organization? So these are the 5 questions. The way we do it is you score each one from 0 to 5. You need a minimum of 8 people to vote, and I prefer to do the voting anonymously, so you don't get what I call executive bias. If I'm in there, then I will tend to bias that. Now, there's actually some bonus material in an older show. I'll put a link into this show so that you can find. There's a PDF document that we're giving that I've written up and I'm giving away about how do you run an entire brainstorming section, a next generation brainstorming session. So hop on over to Killer Innovations and you can download that and grab that off the show notes. And with that, we're going to wrap up this week's show. Again, if you want to connect with us, just text the word innovate to 33444 or go to killerinnovations.com/innovate. That will get you onto the newsletter. That'll get you the weekly newsletter from me on the latest thinking on innovation and creativity. It'll also get you early heads up if I'm doing any public events or if I'm teaching a workshop. I am teaching an innovation bootcamp coming up here in June. So if you're interested in participating in the boot camp, hop on over. I'll put another link to that in the show notes. It is in Sunnyvale, California. That is public. Usually I do them only for corporate events, but this is one of the few ones that's open to anybody can sign up and participate in that boot camp course. So if you're interested, hop on over. And with that, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the podcast. The one favor I would ask is hop on over to iTunes, give us a review. That's critically important for us, and it's the best way that you can let me know that you listen and benefit from the show. With that, thanks for listening. This is Killer Innovations, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.